Hello and welcome to Compliance Culture, the podcast where we explore what it really takes to embed compliance in practice, not just on paper. I'm Lucinda Carney, CEO of Actus, and each episode will be unpacking how organisations can move beyond tick box compliance to build a culture of genuine accountability, trust, and ethical behaviour. We'll be joined by experts and leaders who are making compliance meaningful, from consumer duty and SMCR to training, performance and leadership. So if you're looking to bridge the gap between rules and real-world behaviour, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Compliance Culture, a spin-off podcast from the HR Uprising. I'm Lucinda Carney, and in this series we'll be exploring how financial services firms can move beyond tick box compliance and embed a culture of accountability, trust and integrity. Now, for this episode, we're diving straight into a hot topic, appointed representatives or ARs, and I'm delighted to be joined by Irving Peiris from Create Solutions. Welcome, Irving. Please do introduce yourself and your background.
Hi, Lucinda. Nice to see you again. Yep, I'm Irving Peiris. I've been in compliance for just a bit over 20 years. 10 of those years was at the regulators, and since then I've been doing sort of various things from consulting to consumer credit to various different activities around the compliance space. And did a lot of work around consumer duty recently, and yeah, here I am 20 odd years later.
And I'm really delighted to have your experience and expertise here, Irving, because obviously this is not my area of expertise. But what I understand in terms of this topic is that anyone who works in insurance, investment, or other parts of the financial services sector, they know that ARs have been a big part of the industry for decades. But the challenge is that the FCA, particularly with the consumer duty coming in, the FCA has become increasingly concerned that the AR regime isn't working as intended. So they're feeling that maybe there's not enough oversight by principals and that might lead to consumer harm. So really interested from your point of view, particularly because you did work for the regulator, what exactly is changing? And I guess in this podcast, we're going to understand what is changing. I'm going to ask you to explain what the regime is for people like myself, and really ultimately practical steps that you think firms should be doing to make sure that they are shipshape in terms of the way in which they give proper oversight to their ARs. So just for me, would you help understand in plain English what the AR regime is and why and how it was set up in the first place?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So the AR regime basically is where you have firms with principal firms. They would have firms that the principal firms are directly authorised by the FCA. And what they would do is they would take on appointed representatives to use essentially their permissions, but they would be under the banner of the principal firm, and the principal firm would have to carry out sort of due diligence and everything on them and make sure they are working appropriately to service those customers using the principal firm's permissions. So it's basically they're like that. Essentially, they're acting as a branch of a firm, but the firm carries a lot of the sort of compliance burden or what have you, and that's how it was in the older days. So I think what you're talking about, sort of what's shifting, is the FCA's requiring firms to have a lot more detail and know a lot more about their firms than they did in previous years, so to speak. So you would have heard a lot about consumer duty, and so a lot of that work is around the customer piece there. So some firms, but back in previous regimes, weren't keeping that close eye that they should have, and if the ARs weren't doing as they should have been by the customer, the firms were keeping them at sort of a bit of an arm's length and not really taking the responsibility that they should have, really. And now the FCA is putting a lot more resource and a lot more time and effort into making sure that the ARs are working as appropriately. So I think there's roughly about 34,000 ARs in the UK, at the moment. So you about 20,000 OERs and about 14,000 are introduced or appointed reps.
So
So
actually,
the
can I just ask about that? Because I
yeah
can understand what an introducer is if you're kind of introducing leads. It's maybe a route to market or sales force almost. But
yeah.
why do so many firms use ARs? Why are they so popular as a model?
Well, because it's a way for firms to get to market that bit quicker at the moment. So I think it takes about 3 months on average at the moment for firms to get in. That's looking like when you're looking at what their current sorts of that. But obviously the FCA has their timing, I think 6 months for a complete application and what have you. But firms used to see it as an easier way to get it into market now. But the FCA's, like I said, put a lot more resource into it. So you have, for example, there's a department now that's fairly new that's just dedicated to appointed reps. So firms are required to do a lot more due diligence than they were previously. And another thing, and I think this is the one that's really sort of the onus has been put on firms is once you've got them all approved, then you still need to keep doing checks on them. Like so, for example, there's the forms that have to be completed on the FCA websites for attestations that firms are working appropriately and they're doing the right things and what have you. But for the ARs, there's now the declaration that wasn't once there before. I
Right.
think came in November 23, right? So from there you got to talk about like sort of their financial health, and you got to talk about like sort of what sort of sales they're putting through, how they're being paid, and what have you. So it's really sort of causing principal firms to investigate more into those types of firms.
So is that what they're expecting them to do, like a subset of the SMCR regime that they're having to do? They're getting ARs to have to do sort of an F&P approach. Is that what you're talking about in terms of
So
regulations?
there's they've got to make sure that those individuals are fit and proper and what have you, and they've got to keep making sure that they are right. So generally, what happens is you'll have one of the individuals there will be a part of the senior an SMF of the principal firm. So so you still have to keep doing those declarations and what have you that they're still appropriate and what have you. But what also you need to have more onus on whether they're sort of if the ownership of the firm is changing and things like that. A lot more of that detail has to go through. So the thing is, they're saying like, right, okay, this has to be done every 12 months, but the actual expectation of the FCA is that you have a much tighter grip on it. So, for example, if things are changing within the firm, like so, there's a lot of the FCA have been talking about transparency, making sure that the senior management of the principal firms know what the ARs are doing and what have you. There's just what the FCA has come out and said is that appointed reps should be treated as a branch of the firm.
Okay,
They should
fine.
be someone that what's happening. So, for example, complaints is a good example, right? So, if someone's complaining to the AR, that's fine, and they to deal with it. But the principal should know about like, are they carrying out root cause analysis and things like that? Are they learning from mistakes? Are the same issues still coming through, right? Whereas now the supervisors from the FCA of the principal firms will be asking those sorts of questions, like okay, how do you know that they're treating their customers appropriately? How do you know that with the complaints coming through that those customers are being dealt with properly? There's a lot of information that you have to like that firms have to do more of anyway now. So the customer work is so much more important now since Consumer Duty came through. It's kind of at the forefront of everything that firms do, and that's the same for AR firms as well.
So I can see it's almost like before the AR firms were slightly at arm's length and what they were doing,
That,
so they
that,
the less so.
you're right, but that was don't think that was ever the intention, but
Yeah.
it was just a industry practice. The industry practice was they didn't keep as close an eye as they should have. And
I mean,
so now the FCA is throwing a lot more resource at ensuring firms are making sure that those ARs are doing the right things.
I can see that from a point of view, the FCA wants to have proper visibility. If they're expecting a firm to have proper visibility in terms of complaints or the impact on consumer outcomes, therefore someone operating under their umbrella, an AR, they need to have that visibility, don't they, in order to be properly accountable. I mean, the thing that I find, again, not being in the industry, but because we have been working with firms doing things like SMCR, now you've got individuals who are accountable. I'm assuming that there is somebody in that principal firm who is personally accountable. And so I would want to know that the ARs are doing the right thing, because isn't it basically on my shoulders?
Yes, yes, that's exactly right. Now it's individuals' actual fault when things go wrong like that
Yeah.
since the
So
MCR
I
came.
definitely want to be able to see what my ARs are up
Yeah,
to if they're
yeah.
kind of using
And
my
and that
license.
and that is what is like, so the ARs now, there's a lot more work that's sort of being done, like, because they expect firms to go out and principal firms to go out and do sort of compliance checks and go out and do visits and understand what they're doing. They're looking at their finance, like, they're expecting firms to be a lot more understanding of the financial stability of those firms as well. Like, have they got enough resource? Well, are they going to be able to, have they got enough liquidity in the firm? Are customers going to be so short if something happens to the firm? Wind down practices, that all these sorts of things have to be taken into account. So a lot of previously, a lot of the regime was about due diligence on the way in, and
Right.
that's still very important. So there's still, like, dedicated appointed reps teams that do a lot of work around the authorization of the ARs. But I think with everything, it's not a once and done job now. The due
Right.
diligence needs to keep going through. The ARs need to be transparent with the principal firms if there are going to be changes made within them. If there's going to be, even things like changing of major shareholders and what have you, that all needs to be communicated appropriately and what have you. So I think a good way for this to sort of go forward is for firms to have a good set of KPIs that it has on their principal firms. Sorry, principal firms to have on their ARs, so that when it comes through, they are aware quickly if things are starting to change. So these, like they would with their own firm.
Yeah. So,
Like,
it
so
sounds like that. Like you're saying, it's a branch. It's basically, how do you open your arms and make sure you've got visibility and control of your ARs in the same way as you would if they were a branch or a department in your firm.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. So there's a lot of, there's more emphasis now on sort of reviewing systems, controls, and governance. How do you know that the systems and controls are working? Right. So, like, as in with the consumer duty, there's been quite a lot about, like, are the right people finding out what's happening, right? What's the governance structure looking like? What sort of, how's that information being fed up? Right? So generally within a firm within itself, that information should be quite easy to find. But in principal firms and ARs, between them, that sharing of information needs to be a lot more fluid, I think, than it has been in the past. Because at any time the FCA can come knocking and say, right,
You need
okay,
to be real time.
so
You want it at your fingertips. You don't want to be
yeah,
just kind of doing it,
yeah,
ad hoc, or when there's a risk, or occasionally. And I mean, with that in mind, then, if you're advising firms, they come to you, obviously, and they come to you and your colleagues at Create, and say, sort of, what's the process? What are our steps if we want to put in place a good AR oversight model? Do you have sort of a number of things? Like you've mentioned, sort of look at their business models, you've mentioned financial security and stability.
yeah. I mean,
What would you say your
what
top tips are?
my top tips is sort of get in a room with the ARs and with the individuals themselves, get in a room and sort of break down the information that you think you should pull out, right? And working out sort of ways. And then I would get an external company to come in as well to sort of so you can benchmark it because the regulators like you doing these sorts of things because then that way it shows that you're not marking your own homework.
The
You're not
benchmark,
doing
yeah.
things just because the thing is everyone thinks they're doing a good job, right? People take pride in their work and what have you. But it always helps having someone else come in and review and help you and say, oh, you know what, you haven't thought about that or you haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a fresh set of eyes. That
Yeah.
always helps. Having a system that you can find the information out quickly from. So a way that sort of KPIs and what have you, and risk indicators, they can all start they can almost be at your fingertips. So, I think that's quite
Ongoing tracking, basically have that kind of make sure you've got that ongoing visibility and management of information.
yes, yes, exactly. You need to have that in itself as well. So that sort of thing helps you with your governance as well. Also, like sort of, so there's a lot of work about information about the customer side of it as well. So I think you want to make sure that those people within the ARs have had the appropriate training, so all the T&C work, training competence work there is solid within your firms to make sure that you can track that. Don't get me wrong, mistakes could be made all the time. So, and complaints can come up for any number of reasons, and for whatever reason, individuals may make mistakes. But what you want to make sure is that any of those sorts of mistakes you're learning from, the individuals learn from that sort of transparency there, being able to go out and say, okay, this happened, and having systems and controls in place. So this happened. This is how we're going to mitigate that risk happening again, right?
That's about
So
continuous improvement, isn't it? Because I often
yeah,
think if there's nothing going wrong, then perhaps it's not real because you do,
are
yeah,
the magic green KPIs. That
yeah. So
is yeah. We've all seen it in the past, and the KPIs and what have you. That there's never going to be an exact science, right? There's always going to be they're always going to be tweaking as your firm improves. Then you need to tweak them more to make sure the continuous improvement. And sometimes you're gonna mark yourself too harshly. You'd be like, oh, actually, when we're looking at this, let's do it again. Like sort of, the FCA, they said, particularly with consumer duty, it's not a once and done thing,
yeah,
right? So what they're looking at is for firms, particularly with regards to their customers, to make sure that they are, continuously improving on how they're dealing with them and how, looking at the sort of the outcomes for those customers. So there's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of years about customer outcomes and what have you, and the regulators want to see tangible MI about this, and that doesn't just stop at just your own firm. That should come for the appointed reps as well. Like so, for example, one thing that was coming up was about sort of, with the appointed reps when they're coming through, how they're dealing with the customers. They might be getting the sales over the line and what have you. But then what happens if there's an issue? What's their claims data looking like? What's happening there? Are they, looking at sort of how they're selling to individuals? So the firms need to have a understand exactly what they want from their ARs. And there's another big part of this, I think, is firms need to discuss with their ARs what their target market is, right? And
yeah,
what good looks like in that target market, right? And then build effective KPIs around that so that if they're not meeting that, let's interrogate the data. Let's find out why that's not happening. Why so say if there's certain demographics that they feel that they should be selling to, and then they get more, a lot of claims aren't being paid out, too many repudiations. What's the reason for this? Are they sending the wrong customers to those products? or is it something like, the product doesn't do what it says it is, or the product's not right. Okay. So then those ARs should be thinking themselves, okay, well, let's start sort of, branching out or trying other products and what have you, right? That sort of information isn't something that you want at the end of the year. That's
No,
kind of data that you can use to help you sort of, help you as the principal and help the AR grow.
to make sure you've got that, yes, that kind of the ongoing flow.
When it's time to report to the board, clarity is everything. But all too often, key information is scattered amongst spreadsheets, emails, and disparate systems. With Actus oversight, governance becomes effortless. Your key consumer duty metrics, status, and outcomes are visualized in real-time dashboards, ready to share at the click of a button. Evidence accountability and progress without the admin headache. So when your board asks for proof, you already have it.
Just in terms of the examples that you've come up with through there, that links very much with consumer duty outcomes and the consumer impact of what they're selling and the products that they're selling and the appropriateness of it. And also you mentioned there's other things. So that's very much about what they're doing in relation to the sales and the customer. You also talked about the ARs themselves, making sure that they've got the right training and competence. So that's kind of like the F&P piece.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about whether they're financially stable, if they've got the right governance and business models. So those are kind of three quite different sections, but it feels quite a lot to manage, particularly if it's an AR that's just one person. So practically, would you see a principal firm saying, these are the metrics you need to report on monthly, do it? Or would you say to the AR, what do you think you should report on and recommend it? Or how do you get to this without it being, if you've got a number of ARs, without it being a massively onerous activity?
Yeah, I mean, like, so there's a few ways you could do it. And the easiest way is just to have a blanket set of KPIs and everyone has to adhere to it. That's probably the simplest way for the principal, but that's not necessarily the best way for the ARs themselves, because some
And
firms have
maybe it's
ARs
too
that
generic as well. It may not actually improve outcomes, I guess, if you think consumer duty, if it's very generic.
exactly. And so, some ARs, some principal firms have ARs that are quite wildly different. Right. So
Yeah.
there needs to be sort of the discussion around the table of what they're trying to do. I mentioned earlier about target market and what they
Yes.
want to be doing. So I think that's quite an important piece. So I mean, like sort of personally, like sort of if there's like that, if you've got a lot of different types of things, again, go external, come to us at Create, and we can help you develop these KPIs for your various cohorts and what have you, and help you sort of get an understanding of what we can do is tease out what you need to put down,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause what you need is something to go to the regulators when they come knocking and say, these are our firms, this is what they do, and this is why we've got these KPIs, because we feel that they're the most relevant to the firm of this size, with them regarding the permissions that it uses, the business that it does, the volumes involved. That's that's the way I think to do it, because otherwise you could have firms just doing such wildly different things, getting them all to complete the same information, and then a lot of the time it might not be relevant for everyone to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's entirely up to the firm,
Mm.
because it depends on the size of the compliance teams, like sort of, because what you don't want to be doing is having one individual chasing all these different people trying to get it come through. You want it to sort of flow nice and easily back in. And if something is looking off and the KPIs are looking off what they're expected to be, then there needs to be a dialogue that's had quickly, right?
Yes.
And it could be something, like, for example, I don't know, you could have one or two people, you could have a very small firm, and then one day, like, sales completely off and there's no one there. That's because someone got married and been on honeymoon for a month. And then you can just something where you can just get a message like that across. would help, rather as particularly is because everybody's busy. The compliance teams up and down the country, you would have probably known by speaking to a few. Everyone's got more work on and more ways, so everyone's trying to sort of find out a way to work smarter, more efficiently, and what have you. So that's
Capture the right things, but do it in a routine way, in a way that's easy to track. Yeah, it's to be a smart way, as you say.
yeah, yeah. I think that's what the regulators have been pushing for. When we've been speaking to them before about sort of systems and ways that and we're saying about like sort of ways that we could use like Actus and what have you, is like the way to for transparency and what have you. So when the information's there, people will be able to click a button and say, right, okay, this AR is doing that, that AR is doing that, blah blah, blah. And then it's just quite a like sort of it's.
They could have separate dashboards, couldn't they? That's that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, sort of,
Yeah,
I think separate dashboards is going to be the way forward for everyone. 'Cause you're going to have your overall dashboards, and that's sort of, and that will feed into like how the business is doing and what have you, and that's good for the finance side of it and what have you. But then being able to look into the different ones and break it down to make sure, and also like sort of, the messaging that goes through that can happen as well. You can get, or if something is going off, and then you can do factors in where they have to give an explanation and what have
yes,
you. All these sorts of things help because when you're doing your monthlies, your quarterlies, and everything, these invariably you'll go up, and then the CEOs and the people at the top of the tree is like, why is this off? And then you can have all of that information at your fingertips rather than getting the information together and then having to scramble around to various different people. You want it all
yeah,
in one place that's nice and easy to view. And I think the key to this, because the compliance burden, so to speak, isn't going anywhere.
yeah,
It's just I think firms now and the regulators have been saying as well, that they want firms to become more innovative with how they do this. And they want them to be going out and finding new ways of testing their own business models. Because I mean, from my time when I was there, we would often say to firms, you know your business better than we do. You tell us what you're doing, and so we can have a look. And I mean, because those things, when you're doing your client files and what have you, because firms can have like sort of ARs can have reams and reams of policies and processes and what have you. But if the outcomes to the clients are bad, then all those reams of paper aren't going to don't prove anything.
yeah.
So what the principal firms need to do is make sure that on an outcome basis, the customers are getting the right deals.
So it's seeing the bigger picture. So it's you do want to have the metric, but what you're saying is make sure that you are having the oversight, but make sure that you can see it real time ideally. And quick plug,
Well,
Actus
as close as
oversight
you
can
can
give you
get.
dashboards to do that, to keep
Yeah, I
track.
mean, like sort
But very importantly, you can track all of that data to be able to answer questions and hold the accountability, but it's got to be the right information. It's got to ultimately feed into outcomes. But I guess that is why you want to be tweaking it, be
yeah,
constantly reviewing it as opposed to thinking it's done once. And also the other thing I really picked up from this, Irving, is that having third parties like yourselves that create solutions or other consultants, but if you've got someone who can come in and sort of help you evaluate, be that critical friend that can see, well, is that really improving outcomes or isn't it? And is that the right one? Or actually, we've worked with a similar firm and they tried this metric and that really moved the dial on consumer outcomes for their business. Then that's a really valuable way in which people can get can get improvements and do well, essentially.
definitely.
So I guess, Irving, thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to get in touch with you personally or with Create, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, you can look me up on LinkedIn. It's Irving Peiris, and there's not many of Irving Peirises.
Is it P-E-R-I-S?
Peiris.
Yeah, yes. Sorry,
And yeah, look us up on Create Solutions on LinkedIn, and our website is createsolutions.co.uk.
and I'll put all of
And
these links in the show notes as well.
yeah,
So
put all
people
the
can
links
do it
on there. So if you ever want to get in contact, please feel free.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for helping me understand more about appointed representatives and the new challenges for firms to make sure that they're getting the most out of them and meeting the FCA. Thanks, Irving.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks so much for joining me today on Compliance Culture. I hope you found our discussion was practical and insightful and helps us to see how we can all play a part in embedding genuine values-led compliance. If you'd like to know more about how Actus software can support organisations with performance accountability, consumer duty and SMCR compliance, why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk? The links are in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and share the podcast, and join me next time as we continue to explore what real compliance culture looks like in action.
The FCA expects firms to evidence continuous improvement. Just meeting the requirements of the consumer duty is not enough. Actus Oversight allows you to assign clear ownership for consumer duty outcomes while tracking actions and evidencing improvements. This brings the duty to life, transforming compliance from a tick box exercise into a culture of continuous improvement.
Why don't you visit us on actus.co.uk?